And there's been a lot of talk about Africa recently. I've lived this. I'll be 67 years old this year, 2025. And so I lived through the different names black Americans have gone through. I remember being called colored. I remember being called Negro. I remember we adopted the term Afro-American. I was young, probably about 11 or 12 or so. I remember Afro-American went to African-American. And I remember when we became black. And to not get it misunderstood, Afro-American, we chose that. African-American, we chose that as well, to differentiate ourselves from the typical American, or what was and even now today considered American. Okay, so I know we, as African Americans, as black, in this nation, in America, we want to. Many of us want to. Well, we're just Americans. Okay. And that would be all well and good if everything were equal and everything were totally right, but they're not, okay? And so it's very important for us, to me, when we look at our history in this nation, we have a history of suffering, of being brought here in chains, and a very harsh reality that we had to deal with. And so there was a struggle. There was first a struggle to try to understand what just happened. That was trauma in itself. We understand what PTSD is when people go into battle and have traumatic situations. But imagine your whole life being upended from a civilization to a treacherous journey to the New World, and then to be in a land totally different than anything you could ever imagine, and not only that, and to be tortured, mistreated, and enslaved without even understanding or even speaking the language, okay? Tremendous trauma. And so to struggle through that, and to struggle to learn to communicate, to study to learn to read and to write, which was at the point of death, at the threat of death, if a slave was caught learning to read or trying to learn to read. And then understanding your oppressor. And then still struggling for freedom, eventually to be free, but still suffering terribly. And then 100 years later, going through a civil rights issue, struggle, still not being fair, but being more fairly treated. Coming to a point in the 70s of where I was a young man of black power, and taking control of your own life, and putting fear in the hearts and minds of those real Americans. And then only to have it snuffed away by the drugs and the alcohol and the fashion and the music, and simply to assimilate ourselves into a society of Americans before the war was won, okay? That's a brief history lesson of exactly what happened here up until today. And so now we have black Americans, or African Americans, or Afro Americans, or Negro, or color, whatever you want to be called, trying to disassociate themselves from Africa. No, I'm just American. And see, the problem with that is that the war isn't done yet. The struggle isn't over. It's the same old story why we failed before. Because we chose to attempt to assimilate ourselves into a society that really was not equal for us, okay? And so to me then, okay, it's no different than, after emancipation, when the slaves were freed, technically. Many of the slaves chose to stay on their plantations because that was comfortable to them, okay? So now they were no longer slaves. Now they worked for the plantation owner, still living in the same poverty, in the same houses or homes or shacks, working the same long toiling hours, but technically they were free. And so they were getting a little bit of money, but then they were being charged for the homes they were living in, charged for the tools they were using, charged for the food that they were eating. So really, there was still no gain, okay? They were still living the same lives of a slave, maybe less the beating, okay? But they were still, I don't even want to say second-class citizens. They were still low on the totem pole, living the life of a slave, just not being called a slave. But they were free, and they chose to stay on that plantation. And so to me, in the modern world, when I see black folks in America saying, no, I'm just American, you're just choosing to stay on that plantation without being totally equal. You know how it is when you walk into certain places, when you go to certain establishments, and you know the looks you get, you know the mistreatment you might get, but in shade, so you can't really prove it. You know what's going on. You know that when there's a job up, although it's illegal for them to prefer someone that doesn't look like you over you, that it's still done. You know when there's a promotion due. You know when there's something extra. You know when the police stop you. You know. And so we're just deciding to stay on the plantation or just call myself an American. Now I'm an American. And I'm good. It's good being an American, being a U.S. citizen, but I'm not fooled into thinking that everything is right. Now me, I've pulled myself out of the reach of racism. I've created my own privilege. I mean, I live in a fabulous community. I have a fabulous home and cars, and my daughter went to the most prestigious school in the region. And now she's off in college studying to be an attorney. My son is a college graduate, making his own way on the other side of this country and all. So because of life choices that I've made, I've been able to pull myself out of the reach of racism. But that racism exists here. The justice system is racist. The legal system is racist. Come on now. The law enforcement system is racist. We know this. Okay? Now there are certain strategies and ways to pull yourself out of the reach of that racism, but the reality, that racism is in America, and there is no black person, hardly, that telling the truth is going to deny this. It's different when, for a black man, if you're looking in your rearview mirror and you see a police car behind you, than it is for a white man. Why is that? I'm telling you, man. It's just the way that it is here. I'll make this quick. I had an incident about 2 months ago. I was leaving work, pulling out of the parking lot, and there was this guy, one of my co-workers, he was just backing up out of a parking lot, backed right into my truck, messed up the whole front end. Now we know that, you're backing out of a parking spot and you hit somebody that's driving by, you're automatically at fault. We know that. That's given in America. So what I did was I had them call the sheriff to come down there. They can't issue a ticket. It was, government property. But I just wanted them to make an incident report on what happened just so I could give the insurance company. No problems. I was driving by. He was backing up and he smacked into me. Cut and dry. So the police officer showed up. He was a white guy, about 35 years old. Had tattoos all on his arms. I knew there was going to be an issue because I'm a black man in America, almost 67 years old, and I know what goes down here. And so all he had to do was just write a report of the incident. This guy was driving, this guy backed into him. It was really that simple. And so the thing is, we couldn't see the report because he had to type it in and send it through the system, and I had to go to the police station the next day to pick up the report to give them my insurance company. So I go down there to pick it up, and I'm reading it, and what this guy, before that police officer left, I kind of went to him, I said, there's not going to be any surprises, are there? And I kind of chuckled. And I thought it was like, a mutual laugh, And there was a surprise. So I'm reading the police report. The way he wrote the police report was, this white guy was backing up and I hit him. That is exactly what he wrote. That wasn't what happened. It wasn't happening at all. But this was a white guy. This is America. Okay? And this is not surprising. And even when I talk to white people about it and tell them, they're amazed, but they're not surprised. Nobody is. And that's the way it works here. And that is a simple reality that we deal with. But I went and, I sent a letter. I had to write a letter that I really shouldn't have had to write, a real good letter to the insurance company. They ended up charging his insurance, and they paid for my car to be fixed and gave me a rental car while it was being fixed. Everything was cool. But I shouldn't have had to gone through that, because things are not right here in America. Now I'm an American. I'm cool being an American. I served my country. I was in the military. I mean, I've done. I've been working since I was 17 years old. That's when I joined the military. After the military, I went to work for corporate America, NCR Corporation, for 13 years. Now I've been with the civilian government for the past 31 years. I've been unemployed 5 months in 50 years. I'm tired. But the point is, I'm cool here. I know how to make things work. My wife and I have a business. I have an MBA. My wife is working on her master's degree. We have a great business going on. Life is good. We had to make it good. But it's not fair. Okay? But before you differentiate yourself from African American, I just want to be American, be equal first. Because if you're not equal, you're not. Okay? You're not equal. You're not the same American as that white guy is, okay? That's a reality here that we have to deal with when I don't want to be African American. I'm just American. Come on now, we know what's really going on. We know. So let's not try to fool ourselves. Let's just be equal first. I see it the same way with the politics. In America, whether you're Democrat or Republican, I'm neither one. Now I vote based on my interest. I might get something from this party, something from that party. But as far as just being a Democrat or a Republican, that's ridiculous for a black man in America, because things are not equal here. People do not see you the same. You're not judged the same. It's not the same. There is this thing called white privilege. Now, you can create your own privilege, which is what I have done in this nation. But if we were equal, I wouldn't have to create my own privilege. I would be born with it. Okay? But for any black man in America, whatever we want to call ourselves, African American, black, or whatever, to call themselves a Democrat or a Republican is foolish. Because both parties are just using you for your vote. The status of black people in this nation really hasn't changed. From the past 20 years, still unfair, and now they're rolling back even some of the protective laws that ensure that people would treat you right, okay? So all I'm saying is, if this was something serious, look, when the United States, when the colonists came here to America, those white Europeans, and started settling this land, they were still under the jurisdiction, under the ownership of England, right? And so what happened? They didn't like the way they were being treated. Taxation without representation as tyranny. So they had a war to free themselves from England. And they freed themselves from England. So don't be fooled. When something is important enough in this country, they will fight to the death until that thing is done. Evidently, black folks' rights and fair treatment isn't really that important. Because 160 some years after slaves were freed and black people are still not on an equal footing, it must not have been that serious. I don't care if you're a white Democrat, liberal, or you're a white conservative Republican. You're enjoying your life. You really don't have the incentive to push for total fairness for black people in this nation. And I'm not even blaming you. I'm not saying that if the situation was reversed and it was white people who were suffering and black men running things, maybe I might be that way too. So don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining. I'm just saying don't be fooled into thinking you're on this same level. I just want to be an American. No, wait to fight for your freedom first. Fight for total equality, total fairness first. When that is achieved, and maybe, okay, I'm just an American. How's that? But even the concept of just an American, that troubles me, from a different way. People wanting to differentiate themselves from African, okay? And that's a problem for me. And the reason it's a problem, see when I read, like if I read a holy book, say I read the Bible or something, and I'm reading the stories in the Bible, the difference between me and a lot of people, and I've seen it, trust me, I've seen this. What people just read the stories, and that's what they get. Now, when I read the stories, my mind places me in there, in that scene, in those situations. So I experience what they're experiencing. I feel what they're feeling. And so I can empathize with the people, with the characters that I'm reading about. I can feel their pain. I can feel their anger. I can feel their laughter, their humor. I can feel their disgust. Whatever it is they're going through, I feel it because I've placed myself in that situation. I just don't read the story. Okay, I'm in the story. Okay, and I'm afraid that the same, we have an issue even when we're looking at our history as black people in this nation. So you have two camps. Okay, you have the black people that recognize that they are the product of slavery in this nation, that they are the descendants of slavery. And slavery was a terrible and a heinous thing, okay? And then we have black people as well that don't really want to be considered like they came over, during the slave trade, that they were here before 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 years prior, from another way. But from Africa, okay? No, nobody sprouted up here in America. Okay, we can look at that from an anthropological perspective, just from a particular science perspective. Black people did not originate in America. Actually, no one did, but we don't want to go there right now. But so black people, however we got here, whether it was through the slave trade or whether it was simply migration and exploration and landing here thousands of years before, black people are here. And then we're talking about the slave trade. We're talking about, it didn't matter how you got here. If you were black, you were thrown in with a lot of the slaves. And that's it. So we really don't consider ourselves that much with the origin of our arrival, with our arrival in America. Because by the time the slave trade came up, and that's from like the 1620s to the 1860s, if you had black skin, you're going to be a slave eventually. And your family line, once they recognize, hey, wait a minute, once they recognize you, okay? So this whole thing about we didn't come here as slaves really holds very little weight, because you may not have come here as slaves, we're talking about your ancestors, but they became slaves, okay? And it was simple as that. And so then we can differentiate ourselves with how we got here. Maybe your ancestors didn't come over in that boat, head to toe, chained together. But they ended up becoming just like the ones that were, okay? So you might feel like it makes you feel better to say your people didn't come here as slaves, but the truth be told, they ended up being slaves simply because of the color of their skin. There was no, wait a minute. Back in those days, they had the one drop rule, okay? Because what they were having is, they were having black, the slave owners, of course, were having sex with the black women, and these women were having babies that weren't dark-skinned. And then they were having sex with those as they grew up, and so you had light-skinned slaves, and they had the one drop rule that if you had one drop of black blood in you, it didn't matter how light you were a slave. Okay, so when you consider then deeply now the one drop rule. They didn't have DNA testing. They didn't have blood testing. They didn't have the testing we have today to see, where your ancestry was. Oh no, I'm 47% this. I'm 37% that. No, they didn't do that. They just looked at you. And if you look like you had black in you, you're a slave. So I don't care how your people came here. if they had black skin, they were recruited into the slave ranks, okay? And the lightest ones, we had black people back in the day, were so light they were passing for white. But if they knew your lineage, they remembered when you were born, it didn't matter how light you were, you're going to be a slave. So let's just try to stop with this, we didn't come here as slaves thing. It doesn't matter how you came here, what did you end up as, okay? That's important, okay? And it's not a shame to have been the product of slavery. The shame are those who are the product of those who were owning slaves, those who were mistreating slaves. That's the shame. We shouldn't take shame in the ancestors that had to suffer terrible and heinous atrocities against themselves and their family members. We should see them as having a strength and having a resilience and be proud that they survived. I mean, this is when we read the stories and we don't really put ourselves into the mix. Just imagine yourself being among them. You're walking around in regular clothes, having regular conversations, having tea with your people and speaking on things, on politics, on mathematics, on science, on medicine. People, the brutes that are less educated than you, find a way to capture you, or you're sold out by some people or captured by some other African nations and sold into slavery. I mean, so you came from a civilized situation. You don't look at it like it's a book. Put you in that mix, and you're taken here. You're going through this trafficked, human trafficked all the way to the new world, and then you're put in all that adversity. And how do you survive? Now you're there with your wives and your sisters and your brothers and your mom and your dad and your kids. And then you're split. How are you going to survive? So you're split from your family. You sit there, there sit here, there sit here. So then you find other kids, other wives, other husbands and brothers and aunts that are split from their families, and you make makeshift families with them to try to find strength with each other to survive. And sometimes you survive, you're tortured, you're worked till you're dead, you're beat, raped, molested. But some survive. And they go on and they have kids going through the same trauma. You're talking about 100 years of that mess. But you're determined. You're determined just like we're determined today. Like I'm determined with my kids that my kids are going to be better off than me. And their kids, hopefully they'll be feeling that their kids are going to be better than them. That's what we do as parents, right? Well, it was no different then. So what the heinous, tremendous suffering our ancestors, us in that place, was going through, we were determined that our kids were not going to have to suffer like we were. That was the guiding light. That was the motivation. And so they survived. Some of them, most of them didn't. And then after that, some of them survived. Most of them didn't. But their dream was that one day we would be free. So we have to understand what they went through. Oh, I'm just an American. No. You remember and consider, put yourself in their place, what they went through, just so you can sit here and say, I'm an American. I'm not African. All that crap. Come on, man. That's dishonoring. This is your blood. This is you. You are the result of that, of their suffering, of their sacrifice, for you to be here, to be well. Man, if none of them tried, to better themselves, they just, reckon, well, I'm just a slave and this is just the life that I was going to live. None of them tried to be better. None of them protested. None of them were murdered trying to teach their children to read. If they were just acquiesced to their life, you would be a slave. Black people in America would still be slaves because they weren't trying. The reason we are not is because they did not settle for that mess. They did the best they could at whatever stage they were at to better themselves, so that the future generations of black people coming from them, their descendants, would not have to suffer through what they suffered through. If they had just given in, we'd still be slaves today, because nobody would have tried. So the only reason, I'm just an American, the only reason we are free is because they didn't give up, even at the point of torture, mutilation, molestation, and death. That's a reality. So for me, when I say African American, I'm honoring those that gave the ultimate sacrifice so that we could be free. Now look, on my mother's side, my grandfather's Mexican. On my father's side, my great-grandmother's a white Irish woman. They got their histories, and I'm proud of that. That's good. I mean, I don't really think about it until I might hear some Spanish music or something, you know. For some reason, I kind of like Celtic music too. That might, I don't know if that has anything to do with it. But the point is that the honor goes to those who sacrificed it all. I was a military man. My whole family's military. We all come from the military. A couple brothers and my father, Vietnam. My sister was a medic in Desert Storm. Another brother and I were peacetime. And one thing about the military, you know, they give out medals for valor. They give out the Medal of Honor. They give out the Bronze Star, the Silver Star. They give out medals for people that go above and beyond the call of duty, and many of them making the ultimate sacrifice, giving their lives so others might be well. The majority of people don't get those medals because they didn't go through what these folks went through. So when I look at my history, and I look at the Mexican, my grandfather, and I look at the white Irish woman, my great-grandmother, that they are my blood. But they didn't make the ultimate sacrifice. They didn't go through what the Africans went through here, the sacrifices that they went through so I could be free. So I honor them. And this gentleman I was speaking to yesterday, well, you know, so you just don't honor the other people that are your blood? Yeah, it's like the military. The highest honor goes to those who give the ultimate sacrifice for the good of the rest. And so it's not that you dishonor those that did not get that Medal of Honor, but you especially honor those that gave the ultimate. And what I'm suggesting, as African American in America today, although I have Mexican blood in me, so that would be Spanish blood, Iberian Peninsula, I would have the European blood, the Irish blood as well within me. But the ultimate award, the ultimate honor goes to those who sacrificed the most. And those were the Africans that came here and sacrificed for me, okay? African American, because I never want to forget. I never want to not honor those who gave the ultimate so I could be free, okay? Here we got it. Not to diminish my grandfather, but he just wanted to have sex with that woman, okay? Not to diminish my great grandmother, who was a white Irish woman. She just wanted to have sex with this guy, okay? That's why they're in my lineage. But the ultimate sacrifices came to those who did not volunteer for the mission. But when they got there, they recognized the duty that they had to their descendants that would follow, and they gave the ultimate, their lives, their sacrifice, even their submission, as humility as it may have been, because they saw the bigger picture. So yes, I am African American because I honor those who gave the ultimate, okay? Let's talk about division. One of the primary tools that were utilized by the slave traders was recognize how important it was to divide their captives. Okay? So they might have captives from Africa, and of course we know Africa is a continent, so there are many tongues, you know, many dialects, many tongues and all that, communication and all. So they would do their best to separate folks, to mix them together with folks who didn't speak their language, because they recognized that the less communication these captives have with each other, the less opportunity there is for rebellion, okay, for them to create a plan, you know, and all that. So they tried to keep them divided. So it was a division thing. They would divide families as well. They would come to the auction block once they got to the New World to sell them off, and they would split up husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, parents from their children, and sell them off to different people. They would divide them because they recognized that there was weakness in division. You know, you have a strong, like you have a fist here. There's a strength here when all these are working together. But if you divide that and divide this and take that, that strength is gone, okay? So that was the strategy division, okay? And so this has been a strategy, a tactic, a tool that has been used against us from the very beginning. And so we find ourselves funny how we recognize, even as the slavery progressed, say maybe 20 years or 30 years or 40 years or 50 years into it, And then you had the slave owners that were sleeping, with the slave, the female slaves. I mean, you understand that? That's human nature. And so then you had babies being born that weren't as dark, as their parents, and then continue to lighter babies. And what they would do is they would have what they called house, and they would have field niggas, we'll say servants. And usually the lighter ones looked more acceptable to white people. So they would have them in the house doing the serving, doing the cleaning, and all that stuff. And they would have the other slaves, the original looking slaves, out in the fields doing the hard work. And so there arose then a division, a tension between the lighter-skinned black people and the darker-skinned black people, because the lighter-skinned black people had it a whole lot better than the darker-skinned black people, more division. And that's when you get the term, that house nigga versus the field nigga, because the house ones thought they were better than the ones in the field, so there was division. And what's interesting is we've had that particular division in this nation forever since then. Even today you have that issue between light-skinned and dark-skinned folks, and it seems to never end. Okay? And so division is the thing that keeps us disarmed. That's what the politics are in this nation today. How in the world do you have black people saying I'm a Democrat? How in the world do you have black people saying I'm a Republican? Yes, I want to be that. You are nothing but a vote to these people who see you as what you are, and so they'll cater to black people, promise black people stuff, but then when they get elected, oh well, that's that. Okay. So I'm just suggesting then that we have to recognize the power of that division. And the churches are the same way. The churches, we have all these different churches and denominations and even religions that have divided black folks. That's their power. That's their strength. That's our weakness. We have to recognize that. Now I used all that to present this, that now we're at a point right now with the internet. Given the history of black people on this planet, wherever you go, there's never first-class citizenship. Whether you're in Scotland, and that seems to be a very nice place, it's still not even. I was watching a black Scottish girl the other day talking about how she was on a bus and she was being mistreated. A woman saying, "You're not from here," just ragging on her. What is the point of that? because wherever black folks go, other nations, there is that issue, okay? And we're strong and we're resilient, but it's time to be honest. It's time to recognize, no, the fight, the struggle isn't over yet. And if I can just get my mind right, we could finish this right now. See, I think what's happened is even when I look at the struggle of black people, from Africa throughout, the slave trade, but not only the slave trade, through being colonized in Africa. That was just a different kind of slavery. That was still a different kind of second-class citizen, and in some ways that was worse, and I'll explain why in a minute. But I'm just saying, we need to recognize that the struggle isn't over yet. So before I say I'm an American, I'm Scottish, I'm Irish, and all, that's all good. But you're black, and it's not done yet. When nobody gives you a side eye, that's when it's done. When everything is 100% equal, and you know that it's not, when it is, that's when it's done. And what I'm saying is the journey, the struggle, all the way up to here, it's been like a relay race, passing the baton, passing the baton, passing the baton. But it's like we are standing here 50 yards from the finish line, and we're just standing here with the baton in our hands saying, this is where I belong. It's not. The race isn't over yet. The struggle isn't over yet. And it's up to us to finish what our ancestors were forced to begin. I'm just saying, don't lose sight of who you are. Don't lose sight of who they are. Don't lose sight of the sacrifice. Now getting back to the colonized Africans. So now there's a big beef between the black Americans not wanting to associate themselves with Africa. Okay? modern day, okay? Now, we're not even talking about being embarrassed over the slave trade. And maybe my ancestors were slaves. We're not even talking about that. We're talking about now, today, not wanting to be associated with Africa. First of all, let's get, say, well, Africans sold us out. Well, Africans, there weren't a lot of them that were participating. There was a relatively fraction, a few, that participated in the slave trade. Okay, we talk about a continent of Africa. There was only a few, that participated. It's sort of like, in any nation, who are the criminals? Okay, you don't blame an entire nation for the criminals. Okay, oh, that's just a criminal, enterprise. No, there were criminals within every nation. And those were criminals that were participating in the slave trade that happened to be African. Okay, and they were participating with criminals from Europe who happened to be European. Okay, these were the criminal elements. So you can't blame Africa, the continent, and everybody on Africa because of the criminal element that participated in the slave trade. And besides that, you can't really blame Africans because they were Africans who they were selling out, of which you are a product of, okay? You have to hate yourself. You can't hate an African for what they did to Africans when you are African yourself, in this respect. If you are hating them for what they did to them, then you are associating yourself with them and they are Africans, okay? So those Africans back in the day didn't do anything to you. Those Africans in the day did heinous things to Africans in their time who you are a product of. So you have to identify with those Africans if you're going to take issue with the Africans of old who were criminals. I mean, come on, man. It's ridiculous. You know that, man. So let me talk about the Africans of today. Because I really believe that we need to be unified as black people on this entire planet, whatever shade we are. Right? Even if my grandfather was Mexican and my great-grandmother was a white Irish woman, it's that commonality that we have, that African part of us that we honor. Okay? And so then we want to look at the Africans of today. And I know there are some issues. I mean, I have some African friends here in America, from various places, from Rwanda, from Congo, who ingratiate themselves to white people. Even they're Republicans, and they love Trump. And anytime they have an opportunity, they side with white people against black people. Now, they won't say it, but by their words, you know what they're really saying, okay? And so I know this type thing rubs a lot of African Americans the wrong way because we are very cognizant of the struggle that our people have had in this nation, okay? And the struggle that we're still going through at the moment, okay? Not quite as heinous as it used to be, though. And so when we see black people coming here from Africa, because we've always loved Africa. We've always revered Africa because this was prior to like social media. This was prior to most people being able to travel wherever they wanted to travel because travel is expensive. And so in black people in the United States, when we called ourselves African American, we were identifying ourselves with Africa, but we had no idea there were a lot of Africans that had issues with African Americans, right? With black people from America. But in their defense, what I want to suggest is they may not have gone through the slave trade and the issues that our ancestors went through here in America, but they were colonized. They were, in a sense, they were the slave class in Africa under the white Europeans. Come on now, the continent was carved up and renamed by the Europeans and given to Great Britain, given to France, given to Belgium, given to whoever, wanted a piece of Africa so they can exploit them for their resources. So they ruled the black Africans that remained in Africa. It was a type of slavery, Colonization was slavery. In a sense, it may not have been the heinous atrocities that black people had to go through here, but it's not comparable, because what you're going through is what you're going through. They were second-class citizens. They were mistreated. You ever watched, the closest thing that we have, I think, as Americans that we can identify with would be South Africa, the apartheid situation in South Africa. Well, that was Africa. It just hung on to South Africa. They just maintained that colonization. They just maintained that second-class citizen for black people, so we just had a chance to see it. It's like how, we might find some DNA of a woolly mammoth and say, oh, this is what a woolly mammoth looked like. Something that we didn't experience. But South Africa was our opportunity to see what the Africans had been living throughout the continent under the white European rule. So I'm just suggesting that when we look at the Africans today, modern day Africans, even though they have come up, even though the cities are modern, transportation is modern, architecture, many of the infrastructures are pretty good. A lot of them are still messed up. The Chinese are helping to fix some of that. But the point I'm making is they have their wounds. See, and let me compare it to the Americans who were the descendants of slaves. There's no slavery today in America, but there are still wounds, there are still scars, there are still issues that we have, PTSD that was passed down generation to generation to generation, which kind of manifests in our lives today. There are many black Americans in our nation that are self-destructive. Addicted to drugs, addicted to alcohol, promiscuity, playing around, not moral. There's a lot of issues in our community. But I guarantee you there's a lot of issues in the African black communities in the continent of Africa as well. Why? Because these are the remnants, the scars of the issues. See, we have scars from the issues we went through with slavery. The Africans have the scars of the issues they went through being colonized. And so we have scars that respond in certain ways. Now we as black Americans, for the most part, our scars from slavery is that we have a resentment to white people. I had to tell this white woman the other day who was trying to tell me that, her dad didn't like black people, but, she does. I said, look, let me tell you a secret. Black people don't like white people in America more than white people don't like black people. That's a reality. Come on, who would, right? So because of the way we came up here, and slaves being mistreated and killed and murdered and betrayed, and our families being tortured in front of us, we had a tremendous resentment to white people here in America, most of us as black people. The difference in Africa, being in that situation that wasn't really slavery, but that was enforced second-class citizenship for decades and decades and hundreds of years, you have a people growing up believing that they are that second-class citizen because they're not being tortured, they're not being murdered, they're not being dismembered and mutilated. If you just act right, we'll just live this way. I'll just be the servant. I'll just be the second class. I'll be opening the door for you. I'll be the taxi driver. And so you have and you might want to Google this, called the Stockholm Syndrome, where there was a bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden years ago. And the bank robbers took the people, the workers and the customers, hostage for an extended amount of time. But by the time that standoff was over, those hostages grew an affinity, a liking toward their captors. And that's a human nature, a human nature response. Same as when you have a dog or an animal that you might not treat it exactly right, but it just loves you. It loves you. And so that's what you had out of Africa. So the manifestations then are these used to be colonized Africans looking at the white folks, envying the white folks, what kind of life they lived, wishing they lived that life too. And believing that the more they assimilate themselves to white folks, and the closer they are to white folks, the better off that they will be. So that's their scars. Our scars from slavery is a resentment. Their scars from being colonized is desiring to be like them. Okay? So when they come to America, success is aligning myself with white people. Black people just don't get what they deserve because they're not working and all this kind of stuff. So before we start hating as Americans, the modern day Africans, recognizing their manifestations are simply a result of the colonization that happened in Africa. And the issues that we have in America as black people today are the scars and issues that we have because of the slavery that was in this nation. Okay? So what I am suggesting then is that when we talk about Africa, when we talk about the origin, we have to recognize that origin is not modern day Africa. Okay? It isn't even modern day Africa for those who actually are still living in Africa, those Africans. The origin that they need to recognize is before they were colonized. When Africa was civilized, Africa was mathematical, Africa was science, Africa was civilization, Africa was social order, okay? That's the Africa. It's not modern day Africa because they're jacked up because of the scars from their colonization, just like we're jacked up from the scars of slavery. And so our origin of Africa isn't modern day Africa. That's a mess because of what they went through, as we are a mess because of what we've been through. What we have to look at is not modern day Africa, but the origin was pre-European invasion Africa. That's the commonality of all black folks. And we're going to talk about the ones in America, whether you came here through the transatlantic slave trade or your people migrated here 1,000 years prior. It doesn't matter. Our origin is still pre-European invasion of the continent, which they now called Africa. Okay? And what I'm saying is, no matter where you are, as black people in Scotland, or black people in Ireland, or black people in China, black people in Japan, black people wherever you are on this planet, our common origin is pre-European invasion, the continent which they now called Africa. And I'm telling you this, that the only way we're going to be equal is when we unify and we insist. I've lived my life, coming up in the 70s was a good time for me as a junior high school. High school, I was a military man. 1976, I was 17 when I joined the military. The Black Power movement was a wonderful movement. And so many of us of this age, because I was kind of young, so many people like between the age of like 72 and 66 or so, 5 or so, have this different kind of attitude toward the power of black people and the potential of black people. And we just settle. We settle before the race is over. And we don't need to, man. I'm telling you. I don't allow anyone to get over on me. If it's mine, I will take it. I think we all have to come to that mindset, okay? But we can't as long as we're divided. So what I just laid this out to you to try to express to you how we were unified and we were divided. And we have an opportunity now with this social media to reunite. Man, I am so disappointed when I'm going through like TikTok and I'm looking at these live broadcasts, I guess, where they have guests, and I don't even know how to do that. I wanted to get in on one, but I didn't know how to access it. But anyway, we're talking so much ridiculousness. How black Americans don't like Africans, or certain Africans don't like black Americans, and all this. And the British, they were the English blacks and the Scottish blacks. They weren't even in that. I think they were initially what opened the door for this dialogue. But we are so ignorantly stupid. I'm sorry, but as it pertains to us, we cannot participate in the strategy that they used by dividing us. And so now they've taken their hands off and we're dividing ourselves. No, we want to be FBA. Well, we want to be just Africans. We want to be just American. All this stuff, man. Well, what benefit? What we have to recognize is where we came from. Okay? Originally. And why and what happened that brought us to wherever we are. and realize that where we are right now today, we're not being treated as first-class citizens. I'm not saying we're having dogs sicked on us and suffering like people did prior to us, whether in Africa or whether in the United States. I'm just saying it's not where it needs to be. It's not where it should be. Now you might say, I can tell you this. My life is 100% drama-free because I've created a situation for it to be, okay? So I could sit back and say, oh, well, let them worry about it. Sometimes I wonder, well, I just can't. Because I see so much more for us, man. But we have to be united, and with social media, it's easy. We just come together. Whatever issues we have, just squash them. Just drop it. We have our issues because of what we've been through. They have their issues because of what they've been through. Just like your family members. You can't be hating on your brother just because... Look, my brother was the Republican mayor of this predominantly white city around where I live. And so whenever we get together, we'd have some deep conversations, deep arguments. He's still my brother. For real. I think maybe that's what we'll call this, but he's still my brother. Let me tell you before we close here. I think we're going to close. All right, where are we? Maybe not. I remember, I came from a military family, so we moved around a lot. I was born in Los Angeles, California. We lived in Europe for 5 years, lived all around the U.S. Later in life, I moved and lived in Asia. But I think we were about, I don't know what grade I was in. I think I was in about the 4th grade or so, And my brother was 3 years older than me. He was about in the 7th grade, something like that. And we were walking to school. The schools were in the same area. And it was like every day he'd just be picking on me. You know how big brothers do, right? He'd just be picking on me. And I'd just have to deal with it. I was the little brother, and I was used to it. I lived with him, right? And finally, I guess this big guy, he was a kid too, but had been walking with us, was just tired of him picking on me. He grabbed my brother, held him up, back behind his neck, and told me just to hit him. He won't do anything, just hit him, hit him. And he begged me to hit my brother, and he was holding him so he couldn't hit me back. And guess what I did? I didn't hit him. Oh, he deserved it. But I didn't hit him. You know why? Because he's my brother. We have to get down to that reality about black people all over this planet. I feel really sad for us. Because things have changed. I told you I was a product of the 70s, right? The Black Power movement. Man, I don't care where you were, you saw another black person, you would respond. I think my response was like this. We all had our little thing that we would do, right? And we'd always acknowledge what's happening, how you doing, and we would always acknowledge, man, I don't care if I was, no matter where I was in the United States, when I was overseas, I'd be in Japan, I'd see a black person I'd never seen before, black people, we always acknowledge it. Korea, the same. What's happening? It doesn't matter if you didn't know them. It doesn't matter if you never saw them in your life. You had a connection to black people, no matter who they were, no matter where you were. That's your brother. Today, it's like, even with young people, you just walk by and they just walk by. And I always try to make sure and engage. But it's like times have changed. We need to get that back. We need to pick that baton up off the floor. The race isn't over yet. And the end of the race is bringing our life situation to where it was before they interfered. The unity that we had, we regain that unity. That's the end of the race. And there's power in unity. There's tremendous power in unity, but it's not going to be given. It must be taken. But at this particular point, out of all the suffering that our ancestors had to go through, whether it was being colonized in Africa or enslaved in other places around the world, or simply mistreated after migrating out of Africa, whatever they had to go through, all we have to do is unify on social media. As we begin to unify, as we begin to get to know each other, as we forgive each other, if we feel there's aught, we'll come up with game plans. And we focus our money, focus our strategy. And this is what I'll close with. And I mentioned this in one of the last programs, but I think it's appropriate to mention now. We had in America this thing called the Montgomery bus boycott. Montgomery, Alabama in the 60s. We boycotted the bus. That means we stopped using the bus system. And the reason was, in Alabama, in this particular city, Montgomery, black people could ride the bus with white people, but black people had to sit all the way in the back of the bus, and white people were reserved to sit in the front, okay? And that was the rule, no matter what. It doesn't matter. I don't care if the black person, and if the black section was full, and there was nobody in the white section, the black people couldn't sit in the empty white section. They had to stay in the black. I don't care if you're an old lady, if you're a pregnant woman, I don't care what the situation was with you. Black people could not sit anywhere but the back of the bus. Well, in time, black people got sick of that. And they decided, they unified. They got together, came up with a plan. Okay, we're going to stop riding this bus. Okay, because they had to get places, they had to go to work, they had to go wherever they had to go. They always rode the bus, and the bus. A lot of white people in that city had cars. Black people didn't so much, and so the bus line was relying on that black money. Those black people stopped taking that bus. They got together, determined in unity that we're going to exercise this power. Man, within about a week, that bus business was going under. It was losing so much money, no black person would ride that bus. And they changed the rule. Black people could sit anywhere they wanted to on this bus, because the bus station knew they were about to go out of business if black people continued not riding that bus. There's power in unity. There's weakness in division.